Welcome back, everyone. I am Cass Piancy. I'm joined as usual by my partner in crime, Mr. Bennett Tomlin. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you, Cass?
I'm doing good. We're joined by a super special guest today, Katie Baker from The Ringer. She's been covering the Sam Bankman-Fried trial. Katie, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I was just talking about how I'm very happy to be here. I've been a fan of you guys for a while, so this is exciting.
It's exciting for me too, because we'll put it in the show notes, but you did an article very recently. Well, I guess it was a week ago now, but it's called Caroline Ellison was supposed to shock the SBF trial. Instead, the defense team has. I think this is like the best article I've read about the Sam Bankman-Fried trial. It makes you feel like you're in the courtroom. So I just recommend everyone go read the article because you feel like you're there, and your like social media awareness, which Bennett and I haven't gone into this in depth a lot, but like I think social media actually played a really significant role in this, and you seem to have the pulse on that. And I'm just, I'd love to pick your brain on that. I don't know where you'd want to start, but just like maybe just your delve into Caroline's social media, reading the books that she's read and like all of that stuff. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that stuff.
It's funny. It's like I'm thinking about it as you're talking, and I'm like, I've always had a little bit of the degenerate in me. So I've always, kind of followed like what's going on whatever the kind of latest social media is. But like in the context of this case, I mean, I write for The Ringer, which is, I've been sitting in the courtroom and people say, oh, who are you here with? And I say The Ringer, and they either know it or they don't. And if they don't know it, I have to then say it's a sports and culture site. And here I am in a courtroom for a fraud, a crypto fraud case. But to me, it is like a sports and a culture and a finance and a politics and a tech story. And I'm kind of trying to cover it in that way. And to me, it's all those things. And, and I've always been someone who's been like extremely online, terminally online, ever since I was a teenager, moderating IRC chats in the 90s. And before I was a journalist, I worked in finance and did that kind of during the rise and fall of the pre and post global financial crisis. So I love fraud. I love charlatans, but like I do, I'm not to say that, but it's been, in my kind of career, which has changed here and there, it's been interesting just to see, whether it's sports or entertainment or whatever I'm covering, like to see the characters and the people who convince people to give them a lot of money. And, just when you think like there can't possibly be like a new weird fraud character that supersedes this last one, like there's always someone, and this is the latest someone. And so that's how I'm kind of approaching this.
There always being another fraud someone is, I think,
there's
what keeps this podcast going.
I mean, like, honestly, you guys have so many of these like micro characters, and I say micro, and it's like to the tune of like, imagined and real and sometimes invested upon billions in this space, which has been so funny about covering this trial. The ease with which they're switching between little m's and double m's and b's and big b's and, talking about sums of money. Like they always have to explain to the jury, like, this looks like it says $1,000, but that means $1 billion. Just like the way they keep these spreadsheets are very round numbers. And so that's been kind of funny to see, like not just funny, but like very telling like, of the case.
It feels apt that you're covering it as like a cultural, event, because as you said, it is like a new fraud, but it's also a huge, massive fraud. It's gambling. It's international. It's all of these things at once. And it's crazy to me how much of this is like on Twitter or you guys you were like going through her Tumblr. I guess we're into a new time, like this didn't happen with Bernie Madoff. This didn't happen in the '08 crisis. People were not hunting on Twitter to find what someone said about I don't know, mortgage-backed securities. That wasn't happening.
Cass, there's a scoop in there if you find Ben Bernanke's Tumblr.
I feel
okay.
like we got a fabulous fab email here or two, but no, I totally know what you mean. Like, I mean, that's what it has always been so interesting. I mean, about all of this, Sam in particular, but in the article I wrote about Caroline, like you look at Caroline's social media presence and you can just kind of trace her, her trajectory. You can kind of see her as the person that she became and was, and who she met and who she like was crushing on, and and what weird and also to her like compelling theories she was like getting excited about. And so that was interesting to read. And also, honestly, I went back and read, she quoted from this book called, Reminiscences of a Stock Operator that was written in I want to say 1923, 100 years ago. So it's a century old, but when you read it, it's like reading Liar's Poker by Michael Lewis, who's another character in all of this. It's very contemporary feeling.
What has been most telling moment or most impactful takeaway from your time in the courtroom so far?
I think it's honestly been seeing the way the prosecution has crafted a very elegant narrative, which it's actually been kind of inspiring as a writer. I'm not someone that thinks a lot about, tries not to think too much about that the bricks and bones of things, because I'll go crazier than I already go when I'm writing. But it's actually been kind of motivating to see the way that they kind of drop things in early on, don't really beat anyone over the head with it, and then return to it later. And you're like, oh, I remember hearing about that guy or that entity or whatever it is. And I think a good example of that is this is a crypto story, and a lot of the jurors aren't exactly people that are well versed in crypto, but they've kind of shown how this isn't just a crypto crime. This is just a tale as old as time, kind of old school. Money's coming in on one side and going out the other side, and it's not supposed to. And they've just done a good job of showing that while not speaking down to the jury, and still incorporating a lot of the complicated aspects and stopping to explain those things to them, but also stopping to explain simple concepts. And I think they really just honored the jury in a way that I'm sure the jury feels that they have gotten a lot of the important information. So, but yeah, I mean, so I know you had Danny on, and he was talking about the Australian Santa Claus forensic auditor, professor guy, the expert witness they had. Going into it, I thought to myself, this might be kind of a tedious bit of testimony. It's a lot of when you hear forensic accounting, but it was a very simple PowerPoint with arrows. And we had already heard about all these entities and all these payments that we saw had already come up. We already knew K5. So then you see the volume of transactions going to K5. And I just think about the jurors seeing that, and they can have a little light bulb moment in their head the same way I did, sitting there that same guy, the Kim Kardashian relationship broker, they're giving him increasing to $1 billion. But that's what's really stuck out to me, is how they've woven things in very expertly.
I think you're right, because I've mentioned, I think in a review I did of Zeke Faux's book, Number Go Up, I mentioned how he does a really good job of explaining it. He's mostly explaining scams and frauds and stuff like that. He doesn't delve into here's how Bitcoin works or something, right? He doesn't bother doing that. That's not the point of his book. So on cryptocurrency Twitter, there's so many people who are why aren't they talking about Tether? Or why aren't they talking about this exchange or this person or this? And I'm well, they don't have to. There's no need to bring in a bunch of complicated shit. Bennett and I started this podcast, and it took us 3 hours to try to explain Tether to no one. That's not even to a jury. So I think you're right that it's not even dumbing it down. It's just being respectful and saying okay, we're focusing on the fraud part of this. And that has nothing to do with decentralization or immutable ledgers or whatever.
Exactly. I could imagine the prosecution that confuses the jury so much by being and then the blockchain is, and it's no, it doesn't. You know what? It's very simple. It's very old. It's very something you've seen before, something we all know. And the judge has been kind of the proxy of that. I noticed that sometimes he asks questions in terms of oh, so it's a car loan. And, so he he puts it into terms where it's like, it doesn't matter that this is Genesis lending to, like, you don't worry about that. It's a car loan. It's a depreciating asset. It's whatever it is. And so that's been like kind of my biggest takeaway, that I think prosecution's been very effective on that front.
You mentioned K5 there. Could you talk a little bit about what K5 is and what Sam Bankman-Fried's relationship with this firm was?
I think it was in Nishad's testimony. I could be wrong about when it was first introduced, but it was the importance to Sam of these kind of relationship brokers. And, something that I've noticed the prosecution doing throughout is that they never miss an opportunity to show the extent to which FTX and Sam were in like the popular imagination and sightlines. They show him on Good Morning America. They always have to put things in the record. So they want to introduce the fact that Shaquille O'Neal tweeted in terms of FTX. And so you've got this prosecutor standing there saying, "Who is Shaq?" and then it's kind of, Shaquille O'Neal is an NBA player. But Sam was very excited about this new relationship he had with K5 and the relationship brokers behind it, who were these kind of Hollywood power players. And he had been to an event and he wrote an email very excited about, I think, Kim Kardashian. It was funny reading the list of things and seeing who he was like excited about. He was like, I bet if I gave him, 12 hours, I could get a dinner with, it was like Elon Musk, Kim Kardashian. It was like his, or Rihanna was on it. It was like Elon Musk, Rihanna, and like two other people. It was like his idea of like the hardest to get 4 people in the world. So to him, he was then wanting to invest to the tune of like $1 billion, and was kind of in the process of ramping up in that investment, this sort of joint venture. I was looking at some of the SPVs that K5 had, and it's kind of a murderer's row of a lot of the, the hot tech companies of that era that he wanted to be involved with. And so it was just, to the jury, it was just another story about how he was trying to become like a power player beyond just the crypto sphere.
And Kate, you mentioned Shaq there. K5 also introduced him, I believe, to Larry David, who is obviously in their famous Super Bowl ad, and I believe Tom Brady as well. So several of like these key figures who are out there like putting FTX in the minds of people who aren't hosting cryptocurrency podcasts. K5 was important. Oh, and Bill Clinton and Tony Blair, I think, came through K5
I was going to say the
too.
Clintons were definitely adjacent to all this too, yeah.
Yeah, and Clinton and Blair eventually came down to Scaramucci and Bankman-Fried's Crypto Bahamas conference where they were speakers.
Yeah, and Scaramucci, so like what I started saying earlier and interrupted my own self as usual, but like even when they were doing like phone records and they had to kind of do the nitty-gritty of like asking this FBI phone analysis, like what was he doing on this date? And the reason they were doing that is basically to establish jurisdiction for why the Southern District of New York is trying this case. So it's, it's kind of just the procedural kind of thing, but they don't miss an opportunity to tie each location to an email or a Slack message or a DM about like a social engagement that Sam had. And it was so funny how they did it, because I noticed it was like started with like business associates we've heard of. Then suddenly it was like, I forget, like a celebrity. And then it was like Eric, like the mayor, Eric Adams, of course. Then it was the governor. Then it was former President Clinton. And, and then it's like a, some kind of minister of Saudi investment asking about an internship for his son. Like it was ever thus. Like no matter how high you get, no matter what circles you're in, like someone's son needs an internship. So that was, they've kind of done that same thing throughout. Like that's kind of how they even got, the Kelsey Piper conversation into the evidence, was like kind of in a similar way. It was in the context of like, how does Twitter work? And then they sort of built into that.
The moment that I ended up reaching out to you to come on the show was you were replying. There's no need to name names. You were replying to someone, an acquaintance and friend of Bennett and I. He had a tweet that was entered into evidence, and you were letting him know, like, hey, you were entered into evidence today in the in the trial. And he was like, which tweet? And it was something about it. He was being sarcastic and trolling and saying something about adding more funds into his FTX account as everything was collapsing. And tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but I believe it was entered into evidence because Sam liked that tweet.
So yeah, long story short, I was sitting in the courtroom and I see someone I know on Twitter to be a shit poster, and it's a tweet that's kind of like playing into it's during the collapse, and he's like, I'm paraphrasing, but it's very like, steady lads, like I'm adding more funds, you know what I mean? Like I know I'm mixing metaphors.
It was
here,
basically re-quoting Do Kwon. Yes, you're right. Yeah, yes, that's exactly what it was.
That was the gist of it, and the SBF liked it, and in the context of why it was entered into evidence, they were sort of using it as an example of, what does it look like when SBF likes a tweet? What does it mean to like a tweet? Like they were interviewing, I think, like I can't remember if it was a Twitter. I think it was a Southern District of New York employee who is on the social media team who, extracts the forensic analysis. It's like, I'm like, Sam, you and me both got like, mister. Yeah. So that was why the tweet was in evidence, but they never miss an opportunity to show something that the jury is going to see. And maybe they'll remember that in their mind, someone opened an account, but it's not like they had to prove that this was like, as they always say, like, it's not entered for the truth. It's entered for the state of mind, which, my first day in court, I had to turn to someone to be like, what does it mean when they say this all the time? I'm a novice in court, just like anyone. And I've gotten very familiar with that, but it's interesting, like kind of to see how that works and what can and can't go into evidence. But yeah, so that tweet was an example of that. And it was very funny when the tweeter found out he was now entered into the record.
Bennett's been entered into, and bunch of...
I was excited when I saw you come up. Was that during Caroline's testimony? I can't remember.
Yes, I believe that. Yes.
So.
It's interesting to me how it's like this trial spans both the celebrity world and this like exclusive, billionaires club and all this crazy shit that we think is real and I guess is real, that kind of stuff. And then meanwhile, it's also just Twitter that we're all on and interacting with and seeing the same stupid posts, and it's getting entered into evidence. It's wildly weird. It just is such a weird sensation. And then reading your article, it just feels like it's really weird to be in the courtroom too. Like the energy feels weird. It sounds like everything is odd all the time and a little off. Like, can you give me a sense of the courtroom? I appreciated your description.
Sometimes I wonder, like, am I reading too much into, I think the jury yawned at this moment. But to me, like, and when I was pitching this to my editors and kind of explaining how I would want to cover this, I was like, to me, this is like covering like a sporting event. And I don't say that to diminish it, but like, it's kind of like, you're capturing like the swings of emotion and the people involved and the fact that it's humans. And just when you think that you can like bet on what's going to happen, like someone comes out of the woodwork and does something strange. And so I think like I've felt it most when two of the cross-examinations. So like I thought Caroline's cross-examination, they just like weren't landing anything. And you could just look around and look at the jury. And it just was easy to see that even when they would sort of try, like there was a few times when they tried to sort of bring up you wanted to crush the competition, and they're implicitly referencing like another of Sam's like one-time girlfriends, but the jury doesn't know that, and they didn't like ever say that. So you could like watch those things just sort of wither on the vine, and you could just feel it. You could just watch the jurors like looking around, and then there's other times when you can see them looking back and forth. And I thought Nishad's cross testimony was a time when the defense actually was, doing a good job of like, I don't know, just, nudging him like in a way that I thought they were going to do to Caroline Moore, just getting under his skin, kind of making him look a little squirmy. He's obviously, of the three kind of inner circle people that testified, to me was the most emotional guy. And that was clear through all of his testimony, direct and otherwise. But they dug into that a little bit. And I don't think they undermined anything that he said, but I think you could just see the difference in like what was successful just in watching the jury kind of be enlivened by it and going back and forth, like the volley of it versus just being like, what are they talking about? FTX fiat account, like nomenclature. Like, I mean, that's like what the Caroline cross was. It was very strange.
There's a moment in your article that you described, and no one else, I don't remember anyone else describing this, especially the way you did, which was they first go, can you point to Sam Bankman-Fried? And she's like, yes. And then she starts looking for him and can't find him. And they're like, you can stand up if you can't see him. And so she stands up and she still can't see him. I know you didn't say this in the article, but in my mind, I'm just like, I'm thinking like a juror or maybe just a normal human being and going like, why can't you find him? And I get in your article, you mentioned like he was in a weird spot in the courtroom and stuff, but like, and he had a new haircut, but still you're like, how familiar are you with this guy? If you can't spot him, like he was your boss for over a year, like why can't you find this guy in the court? And you're just like, find him, you know, like what is going on, you know, like in those moments, I'm just wondering if you have any other moments like that to like where you're just like on pins and needles or frustrated or like you can just sense it in the courtroom.
Well, I was kind of like looking forward to that moment because I was asking I was like, wait, do they really have to like, you know, you see that there's things you see on TV. And that was one of them. Like, wow, you really do stand and point. And yeah, she couldn't find him. And then right after that, which I actually think settled the tension in the room, they were like, what's he wearing? Like they have to say what he's wearing. And you could tell she didn't know like how, like that's the other thing. So many of these people testifying are such literal people. And it's been very funny to like hear their answers to things. But she's a suit and you can see the jurors chuckling and you're like, okay, here we go. And now we begin on that note, which is probably actually the right note. I mean, a lot of the very like major moments in the court have been judge related. He's been very vocal, you know, and I'd say on both sides, he's definitely kind of, you know, he nips at the prosecution from time to time, but he really wrecks the defense, and to a point where sometimes you can see the jurors feel like they're almost in on the joke, like, oh, this defense, am I right? Like these guys again. And he's kind of cultivated this mood in the courtroom that's sort of like these chuckleheads need to get their act together a little bit. And I feel like that's true to say. Like I don't want to accuse him of being like one-sided because I don't think he is. I think he's just reacting to different calibers of preparation for the case and, you know, different calibers of like what they have to prepare the case with. Sometimes I think to myself, like the defense only has so much.
Well, they have 1 million pages of discovery or whatever, but your point's taken. And it's interesting to me because Bennett's too young for this. And I'll assume you're too young for this too. But as a child, I'm going to date myself here. But as a child, I do recall my mom was obsessed with the OJ trial. And so constantly I would hear it like, and it was played live. I don't even understand exactly, like it wasn't, I guess it was a state case, right? So it wasn't a federal case. So they were playing it live and it was this huge media event. And I actually distinctly remember everyone talking about his name was Judge Ito, and him being
Lance
this
Ito,
like,
I want to say, yeah.
Lance Ito, exactly. And he was like a huge personality in this trial, and for like all the wrong reasons. Like everyone hated that he was a spectacle because he knew that it was being broadcast across the world and stuff. And I think what's really refreshing to me about Judge Kaplan is that it's like, this isn't being broadcast. It might be a big trial and the media is there or whatever, but like this guy's not saying this stuff because he wants the whole public to see it and he can get a TV show out of it or something. Like you know that this is him being like, what are you guys doing? Or what? Like he's like an old cranky man that doesn't like what these lawyers are doing with their repetition and their the one I don't know if I mentioned this in the Danny episode. I think I did, but he said something about like some people won't be alive in 10 minutes, and I'm just like,
yeah. The other day, like he was getting mad about you know, they brought this guy from Texas who was like worked at Google basically to establish that this is the metadata and this is the It shows Caroline Ellison accessed the document and Sam Bankman-Fried accessed the document. And that was it. That was like the whole reason he was there. And the judge was like, why wasn't this just like a fact that was agreed upon as like, why did we have to testify to this? And at one point he said, and this was, he sends the jury out of the room when he was doing this kind of admonishment. But he said at one point, this is a crime. And then he was like, not as big as the crime in question, but like a crime nevertheless. He's been a very big factor in the case. And I mean, I think early on, like in the very, very first stages, the case was assigned to a different judge who recused herself because her husband worked for a firm that had worked with FTX, or I mean, I forget the exact connection, but just to think about how different of a case it might have been, or not to make another sports analogy, but in the same way where when I first covered a basketball game and team, I remember being very like, wow, the agents kind of run all this shit, like in a way that I guess I knew, but I didn't really know. It's all about the agents. And like when you meet the beat writers, all they care about is talking to the agents and what the agents said. And I feel like it's kind of like that with the judge. Like, of course, I know that a judge runs the courtroom, but like to really see it in action, to see how much they are the liaison to the jury and they can shut things down so fast, or they can allow things. And that's been really interesting in this case. And, and also he's going to be the guy that sentences, I think, Caroline and Gary and Nishad. So it's been interesting to think about how he's reacted to those three people.
I'm interested to hear your take on this. I keep bringing up Liz Lopato in every single episode.
You should. Like, the best. Like, read her stuff at The Verge. It's so good.
I also recommend every single article that she's written about the trial. It's been very, very, very good, and usually quite interesting in terms of she has a take that people aren't necessarily aware of until she writes it down, which I think is really cool. But she mentioned that one of the prosecutors, I believe it's Danielle Sassoon. So she said she's like super intimidating, and that she's very interested in SBF taking the stand because she's interested in how these prosecutors are going to deal with him and how he's going to react to that. I'm wondering what you're thinking about that. Like, I know everybody's like, oh, fireworks, but I'm like, what do you, like, okay, fireworks, but like, what do you actually expect here?
They have a multitude of prosecutors who have been kind of taking turns, but I'd say there's sort of two lead ones, Nikhilesh Roos and then Danielle Sassoon. They've gotten sort of the biggest assignments. Danielle did Caroline Ellison, which I thought was just obviously like, this is a jury with, I think the jury itself is 9 women and 3 men, and then they have 6 alternates who are probably a little bit more like 3 more men and 3 women, maybe, give or take. But we were thinking about if Sam testifies, who would do the cross-examination, and I think it could be smart to have Danielle do it because she's very quick, but she's also she was able to remain really calm. I feel like Roos gets a little sarcastic, like not in a bad way, but I could see if it was him and Sam, it could get a little bit like testy. I think just even seeing the way that Danielle Sassoon handles objections, and, Mark Cohen is kind of always, trying to trip her up, and she's just very cool and collected. I feel like she's got a good little winking rapport with the jury, like when I think it was Can Sun was saying he was telling Sam all these options, or kind of that he didn't have that many options, and they said, what did Sam say? And he said, yep, and she said, when you say yep, are you saying that's what he said? And the jury all laughed. Like, it's one of those things that in the transcript probably wouldn't like read as much, but it was this very, I don't know, it was this moment in the courtroom where you just felt like the jury was locked into what she was saying, and she had this connection with them, and it was illustrative of Sam's kind of demeanor. But yeah, so I'm interested to see who they would choose to cross Sam. I think she could be effective because I could see him, if he were to be condescending to anyone, it might play worse if he's condescending to her, versus I could see him and Roos kind of almost being at too much of like the same wavelength. You know what I'm saying?
I had the opportunity to interview Sam about 3 hours before he got arrested in the Bahamas. And I will say that I was not calm and collected and like and fair and balanced and like, oh, I'll just undermine his argument with a smart little witty thing or something. Like, it was straight up like, hey, no. Explain to me how this isn't bank fraud, okay? Explain how this isn't wire fraud. It is wire fraud, Sam. No, he's not answering any question. Like, I definitely lost my temper.
Where you described having customer funds sent to Alameda as opposed to FTX, and that these were being wired through all of these banks. Essentially, your suggestion was that these customer funds were being sent to Alameda Research, and these customers who were customers of FTX. Can you help me understand how that's not wire fraud?
Sorry. To be clear, and I'm done answering questions from you after this. This is not a constructive approach, but I will answer.
None of it has been, Sam. You don't answer questions.
I understand. So I'm going to answer this question.
No, you're not.
All right, I won't if you don't want me to. Like, you just
I'd love for you to actually answer any question.
So let's just real quick. I do want to keep things as civil as possible. I understand the positions, and I understand the sentiment behind some of this, but I do want to hear the answer here, if possible, Sam.
Yeah, totally. So what you were referencing there was a different like I said, there are many payment routes. This is an example of there being many different payment routes. If you rewind back to 2019, 2020, at that point, which is different from what I described just now, at that point, FTX mostly did not have its own bank accounts, and so instead, when customers wanted to wire money, they could reach out to Alameda, get wire instructions there, and choose to wire money straight to Alameda Research, and then have Alameda transfer them, do a ledger transfer effectively on FTX to them. That was, I believe, roughly speaking, the route that some people used especially in the early days of FTX, in order to, get a wire transfer to result in them being able to access FTX. To my knowledge, they were aware of that relationship, and they were aware of why it was the way it was, and of who they were sending funds to. I think generally, like, the name on the account was Alameda Research. Although I don't know all the details here. And so that was a separate pathway that over time we decommissioned as we got access to basically as FTX was able to get access to its own set of bank accounts.
I call it the Jewish mother nagging methodology of interview, and I definitely actually did get under his skin, and ultimately he admitted that, like, his excuse for the bank fraud was like, well, yeah, it was bank fraud before, but then, and I was just like, okay, so it's bank fraud. Good.
Speaking of not just Jewish mothers, all mothers everywhere, myself included. It's a very like the diet starts tomorrow, like methodology of accounting. It's like, don't worry, like the money's good. I got it all under control. Like, just give me a few more days. Like I'm just gonna have one more donut. And then it's all, just check back with me in a week. I'm going to be a new woman, and I feel like that's the same thing that he was doing. Like, it's, they showed the, one of the things that I think really hit in the courtroom was they showed the Good Morning America, George Stephanopoulos interview that was like, and then we keep hearing the date, like November 2022, that's kind of when everything really fell to pieces. And it was just funny. They were like, December 1st. 2022. And so it's just, you realize, well, this is after all that. And then you see him, and that was this great interview where, he's reading the loan documents and SBF is whispering, can't be loaned out. Can't be loaned out.
That are
but
happening.
Not here. Here it says that the digital assets may not be loaned to FTX trading. They can't be loaned out.
That was just a very telling piece of evidence, and I do think also if Sam chooses to testify, we've now seen him on camera speaking and seeing that it's bullshit. And so if he does testify, like, I think you lose a little bit of the resonance of like what he's saying if you're the defense, I mean.
Yeah, but they have absolutely no control over that guy. I mean, he just wants to do it. I understand, though, if he doesn't do it, if they don't put up any defense at all, his odds are pretty much zero that he's going to get off on any of these charges. So you have to put up some sort of defense. And then you think to yourself, especially if you're Sam Bankman-Fried, you think, I can explain this. And that gives me 0.01. Yeah. And that gives me
That's how he felt toward the balance sheet. He's like, I can fix this. Like, just like, give me some time.
You say, just give me some time. But like, even up until like, literally the day before his arrest, he was going to speak to Congress. He was getting ready to go do that. He literally still believed up until the moment the cuffs were on him, I need just one more chance to put my face in front of the right people, say the right words, and my problems will go away. And just to be clear, to give you some idea on what Sam Bankman-Fried thinks the right words are when you committed criminal acts, allegedly committed criminal acts, of course I mean, is to just go out there and say, I fucked up. That's how you should open your under oath testimony when you committed criminal acts.
To Congress.
Like, who can resist? They're still trying to do it, right? They're still trying to argue for the current valuation of Anthropic, as if like the latest investment extrapolated to a valuation. It's like the same thing that they've already been talking about. They're like, no, but look, in this case, look at this multiple. And so, they've sort of, they haven't really done, in my mind, a like example of doing this, but they've started to kind of talk about the fungibility of a dollar. And, so the road they're trying to go down, like, oh, it's all the same pool of money. But yeah, they're still kind of going down that road, like when they're trying to get Anthropic and the judge isn't having it. And I think Danny talked about this, he said, if I rob you and win the lottery, like I still robbed you.
Yeah.
But you can see how if Sam takes a stand, how he's starting to say, well, these were all these incredibly next level ideas that I had. And I just thought my state of mind was that if I could just, and maybe hoping that someone thinks that means it's not fraud.
Criminal negligence, right? Like I that's all I keep repeating in my mind is they really need them to believe this is criminal negligence, not intentional fraud.
You would have to think a lot of people were straight up lying whose entire deals with the government are contingent upon them not lying to think that that's the case. And yeah, maybe someone is able to make those mental gymnastics, but like, I don't, I've also been thinking about how would this be different if it was in California versus New York and you had a different jury, and maybe in California you would capture a couple, people in your pool who would be more easily willing to
hippie
go down those mental roads. And I think in New York, it's a lot of guys that are, or not guys, but, guys and gals that are like, that have a really good bullshit detector and are just seeing someone who's not even a particularly artful bullshit artist. I think that's kind of my take on but yeah, it'd be interesting to see if you did the same thing over again with a Silicon Valley pool, like what you might pull.
Are you going to be attending the rest of the trial and trying to get in? Are you trying to get into the actual courtroom?
I think they said 2 days before the defense begins, they have to file who their witnesses, or if they're having a defense, or as I talk now, I still don't know whether Sam's testifying. If he is testifying, I am hoping to be there for it, and if I'm there for it, I'm hoping to be there for it. So yeah, wish me luck. We'll see. It's been really cool to cover it the past few weeks, and I'm really, glad that my editors let me go on this wild ride. I think they heard the passion in my voice as I was pitching it, and they let me go. And then we've kind of seen that it's been just a really interesting case, even though it doesn't seem like a close case, but there's still a lot of interesting things that are still being that are coming to light in the course of it. So, but we'll see. Who knows? I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm very one-sided, even though I have come to, when you interpret what you've seen, it has tilted to one side. But I'm willing to be convinced and swayed, and yeah, we'll see. Game on.
It feels increasingly unlikely that Sam Bankman-Fried was the only FTX executive not to commit felonies. Everyone else around him was committing felonies, and he didn't even know they were happening. I mean, come on.
I think maybe we brought this up with David Z. Morris. I know that the defense team or the firm, the law firm that's representing Sam Bankman-Fried is the same one that represented Ghislaine Maxwell. For anyone who's unfamiliar, she was the partner in crime for Jeffrey Epstein. I guess I'm just reflecting on that and going like, has anyone thought about like, how did they perform in that trial? Like she got 20 years, I believe, in federal prison. She wasn't expected to get off either. Maybe she had better odds of getting away with it than Sam Bankman-Fried did at the beginning of this trial. So I'm just kind of curious if like, it doesn't seem like you bet on this defense team to completely get you off of criminal charges, which is maybe why this is a little bit puzzling for everybody. If Sam really thinks that he's going to somehow escape any charges whatsoever, like I can't imagine. He can't believe that, you know?
No, I know. Well, I always think that. I think about like what's Sam thinking right now, especially. So like two things. So the lawyers, like you said, have, a lot of high profile defense cases under their belt. They're also like former prosecutors back in the day, which I think is kind of somewhat of a standard trajectory for a lot of people. I think to some extent it's like, well, they can navigate the system. Maybe they can, knock off years. But you would think if you're looking to knock off years, there's a better way to do it, which would be to not go to trial. Because you hear stats about when you go to trial, I guess SDNY, it's like 90% of the time they win or something like that.
96.
So with all that in mind and knowing Sam, and I just keep thinking like, what is he thinking when the sort of third string lawyer on his team is fumbling around cross-examination? He must just think this idiot, whether or not he's right, whether or not he could ever do this kind of work. I offered not for the truth of it, but for the effect on the listener, Your Honor. I'm not saying he's an idiot, but like, I just always wonder, what must Sam be thinking? And you can sometimes get a proxy into what he might be thinking by looking over at his parents, and they're scribbling on a notepad, and sometimes they're more animated than other times. But I think the same thing. What are they thinking? They or some of their associates are spending all this money. What are they trying to get out of the money? They're not naive.
That's an amazing question, right? It's like, what is the goal here? Is it to get a possible solid appeal? Like, I'm genuinely confused as to what they're attempting to do.
I don't know much, but like I would think to get an appeal, you'd have to have like grossly incompetent lawyers, and it doesn't seem like they're grossly incompetent. It's like if you're trying to tank for the number one draft pick, you got to do a better job than that. But, but yeah, I sometimes don't know what they're looking to do. If this was really your swing for the fences, then why is your cross-examination of Caroline like kind of falling on such a dud?
Obviously, Sam is convinced that he's the soothsayer here and the truth teller, right? Like he's convinced of that. Fine, and based on some of the interviews with Sam at his home that I've read, it pretty much sounds like his mom is very clearly convinced that he can't tell a lie, so she's on board with whatever that is. But then I haven't heard that from Joe. And I'm just like, you guys are wagering your home and your entire everything, your reputation, everything. You're putting it all on the line for what? For what? Like, and I can't wrap my head around that because they're the ones. Sam doesn't have money to put up. They have money to put up. And I'm just, what is happening? What is this?
Honestly, to me, that continues to be like the unanswerable maybe question of just what are they trying to accomplish? What do they, and in light of that, like, how do they think it's going? And, and they're there every day and increasingly they're sort of being entered into evidence. I had read the FTX bankruptcy suit against them, and there's a lot of details in that about the involvement they had on the charitable side and on the real estate side and on the operational side. And And a lot of that stuff actually came up in the forensic accountant guy. He was showing flows of money to their $16 million condo in the Bahamas and showing them signing off on things. And I think, and stuff with Nishad, with his testimony, they were coming up in the guise of directing money to be kind of channeled through him. So you would think that they would not want to go to court either, because all these things are coming out in the record about them in multiple fronts. So yeah, that remains fascinating. I don't have like any answers. I'm just always looking to see their reactions to things, and they can be pretty reactive sometimes, you know.
We talked a little bit about K5 and how it was a relationship kind of super connector for Sam Bankman-Fried that let him access all these celebrities and all these athletes. Anthony Scaramucci, by his own sometimes boisterous description, was one of Sam Bankman-Fried's political super connectors, where he described opening his Rolodex of political contacts to Sam Bankman-Fried. We could argue about the quality and quantity of those contacts later, but do you think there's ever going to be any kind of reckoning culturally or socially with how easy it was for Sam Bankman-Fried to access like a couple of these nodes and get so close to power so quickly?
That's interesting. Like, and Scaramucci's come up with a tiny bit. They've sort of inserted a couple of like emails and tweets from him in there. In my dreams, he would testify of it. But yeah, I think like it's been interesting to see when some of the political like Nishad straw man donor type stuff came up. You know, you see people saying, "Well, this is just how it is. This is not shocking at all," and then other people saying, "What the hell is this?" But I think the story they told the jury, they did a good job of finding the kind of cinematic elements of it, which were. A staffer of Sam's brother flying to the Bahamas with a case of blank checks to be signed and then flying away. And, they haven't really like gotten into the effective altruism thing that Sam's involved in very much at all. They've sort of spoke to it in Caroline's testimony about how he's a utilitarian and how he felt like it was okay to lie and steal. They've quoted Will McCaskill, but they haven't said who Will McCaskill really was or what he represented. So they've that's one of the things that they've just been like, doesn't matter in this case for the jury. We all know that was like this huge thing around it. And I do think that like that is kind of been almost the collateral damage of the case has been to that movement in some ways, even though it's not like within the trial.
Collateral damage almost makes it sound like a bad thing though. And I just want to say that I mean. I'm pro that collateral damage for what it's worth.
Yeah, no, I just mean in terms of like if there's people that are shocked by something or like what, yeah. But I know I was like trying to think of like how you would even explain.
It's the right phrase. I just want to clarify that.
No, I agree. But that's not been something that's been like inside the courtroom at all, really. I mean, a little bit of it, but not. They haven't explained earn to give or anything. Right.
This is the same as like USDC or TUSD or USDT. Like. They're not going to explain that shit. They're not going to explain stable coins to a jury of your peers. No one cares about fucking stable coins.
They did explain stable coins to
the
jury.
Yeah, they said there was a definition of stable coin. But yeah, they kind of say it and move on. They don't belabor it. They just
They're not like, well, Tether is supposed to be. It's not. That is not what they're going to do. Like
Are you saying they're trying to prove a criminal case and not satisfy a couple of weirdos on Twitter?
We haven't gotten and I don't mean to say this right after you said weirdos on Twitter, because I interviewed him for the same article that I interviewed Kaz for, but we haven't gotten a Bitfinex tweet, I don't think.
It's been wacky. I'm really looking forward to your next article, like so much. I'm super excited. I hope it's coming out this week or next week. I have no idea. I'm not your editor, so I'm not.
What are you, my editor? What is this? Slack. Any update? No, yeah, I will. My plan is to have something this week coming out of what the judge called the intermission. Even it was he's at a judges conference, which I just think is so funny to imagine like them all in their robes, like doing the Macarena or something. But yeah, coming out of intermission, I'm hoping to have just like kind of something speaking to like what, all the things that we've seen and learned. And then, yeah, if we'll see if Sam testifies, I will do my very best to be there for it.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on, Katie. That was fantastic.
Thanks for having me. It was so fun to talk to you guys. Like I said, I've been a fan for a long time.